The following program is made possible with support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Faith Salie.
And I'm Heather Berlin. We're going to be reviewing current movies, TV shows, and sometimes checking out a blast from the past, but from a scientific point of view.
And today, we're going to talk about sex.
Yeah. Specifically, we're going to look at perceptions of sex and how sex changes our perceptions, as exemplified by 3 erotic movies from 3 different eras.
Starting with right now. 50 Shades of Grey is the story of virginal college student Anastasia Steele, who comes to interview rich, sexy, troubled billionaire Christian Grey for her campus newspaper. And, well, the whole thing was so popular that I can safely say, you know what happens next.
We're joined today by biological anthropologist Helen Fisher, Senior Research Fellow at the Kinsey Institute and Chief Scientific Advisor to the internet dating site Match.com.
Before we get to the movie, Heather, I was wondering, does the brain react, does it behave differently when it's aroused? And is it different for men and women?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, well, by aroused, you mean
turned on sexually,
aroused.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. There's actually been some studies which actually look at the brain when people are having an orgasm. And surprisingly, there's really similar patterns of activation between men and women when they're having an orgasm. The reward centers of the brain are activated. Yeah, it's very...
Other parts shut down.
Yeah,
right?
Their pain sensitivity goes down. Prefrontal cortex, certain parts of the prefrontal cortex are downregulated, so you become uninhibited, you lose your sense of self, you feel like one with the universe. And that's why if you're too self-aware, it's hard to get an erection or, have an orgasm. So I think that there's a unique pattern of brain activation. There's also neurochemicals that are activated. So for example, oxytocin is released when we have an orgasm, which is this sort of bonding chemical, especially in women, more so in women. Other kind of bonding chemicals like prolactin that are also released when women are breastfeeding. So this emotional bonding, but this euphoria and this kind of a lack of impulse control or kind of freedom from yourself is the kind of pattern of brain activation that we see across men and women.
Let's talk about 50 Shades of Grey.
Absolutely.
Poor young girl, I mean, it's kind of a fairy tale, right? Poor young virginal girl is seduced by this man who's a cross between a billionaire prince and a big bad wolf, right? In a sexy, chiseled package.
Yeah.
And he buys her expensive things, and he flies her in his private jet and on a silvery glider. Why, Helen, is this a story that we see over and over again?
Wow. It's basic romance. They had that story 2 million years ago, it is my guess. I mean, women...
But why? Why is it basic romance that a woman needs something and she gets it from a man?
Mm-hmm. Because 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. Only 3% of mammals do. Human beings are among them. We form pair bonds to rear our young. And this evolved over 4 million years ago. We were coming down out of the trees. We began to stand up on 2 feet instead of 4. Females began to have to carry their babies in their arms instead of on their back. A chimpanzee just walks along with it on its back and can feed itself, protect itself. Women couldn't. Early hominin women couldn't. And so they began to need a partner to help them rear their young. And with that, I think we saw the evolution not only of human sexuality, but of the 2 other basic emotions in the brain. I think we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. One is the sex drive, second is feelings of intense romantic love, and the third is feelings of deep attachment. And both sexes, of course, have those intense feelings of romantic love and attachment.
But why this dynamic? Why is it always young, sweet, whatever girl needs something from powerful man? Why
because
that
they
dynamic?
needed it for millions of years to raise their babies. Women have wanted the resources of men forever, and men know it. They die killing them. They kill themselves trying to get the kinds of money to provide for their woman and their DNA. Men want to be needed, and women want to be cherished. I think it's basic to both animals.
And it's like I'd mentioned this previously, but the 3 Ps, a provider and a protector and a procreator. Exactly. And that's cross-culturally. And so you're looking for the man to provide, to protect, to help you rear the children. And that goes back, as far as we know in terms of the evolutionary history.
Will we ever evolve past that?
Well, it's very interesting because don't forget that for millions of years, women were providers too. I mean, they commuted to work to gather their fruits and vegetables. They came home with 60 to 80% of the
provided
evening
food
meal.
for the children.
They provided the food for everybody. A man went hunting, and 1 out of 4 times he came back with something to eat every night. I mean, I've traveled with hunting and gathering groups in Africa, and the men always like to go out with the women because they know they'll have something for dinner. So this double income family is a very ancient human practice. And of course, as we shed the agrarian tradition, move into more and more women moving into the job market, not only are women providing more, but they're expressing their sexuality. And of course, you see that in all of these movies.
So do you think there will ever be a day far, far perhaps in the future that this will not be the story of romance, that it may even switch one day, or will it always be women want something from men want to protect, women want to cherish? Is it always?
Men want something from women too. They want more from women than women do from men. I mean, women are the custodian of the egg. We're the ones that have the babies. We're the ones that pass their DNA on to eternity. And in fact, men fall in love faster than women do because they're so visual. When they do find somebody they love, they want to introduce that person to friends and family sooner. They want to move in sooner. Men have more intimate conversations with their wives than women do with their husbands, because women have their intimate conversations with their girlfriends, and men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when a relationship is over. So when we put people in the brain scanner, the brain circuitry for romantic love was just the same in men as it is in women.
What do you think the brain circuitry was going on for Christian Grey in this movie?
I don't think he had any for quite a while. I think he was into his S&M. I think he was so damaged that he really couldn't feel love. It was Anastasia that fell in love. And of course, he finally began to fall in love too. And that's how the movie progresses. But actually, I think the movie was about love addiction rather than S&M and B&D. And
who's addicted to whom in this movie?
Anastasia was addicted to this Christian Grey. And of course, he had his next playful sex partner. I mean, in that game, the one thing that I'm not part of that world of B&D and S&M, but I have friends who are, and I've asked them about it, and they say that the dominant person doesn't want to break their toy, and so he was. But by the way, the movie did a very poor job of expressing the S&M B&D community. Those people are apparently very upset about the portrayal. Well, I mean, when I asked people in that community before talking to the two of you, it's a psychological game. You don't need to beat somebody up. It's a psychological game that both the man and the woman have chosen to play. There doesn't have to be any fear, or there doesn't have to be any pain. And it's a game between the two of them of dominance and surrender, which I'd really like to talk about that game, because that game is really primitive. And but you don't get that in the movie. You don't really understand. Anastasia's so in love with him, she will do anything. And in fact, the brain regions for addiction become activated when you are madly in love. Romantic love is perfectly wonderful addiction when it's going well, and a perfectly horrible addiction when it's going poorly. And in her case, she was willing to do anything.
Well, is there an evolutionary or scientific reason that some people want to be dominant and some people want to be submissive?
Yes, I think there is.
What is it?
And I mean, it's got to be some reason that 40 million people, largely women, have bought this book. Here's my hypothesis, and I call it the iguana syndrome. And you take cats, you take horses, you take iguanas, you take almost any animal, and they have some basic things of the courtship process. And let's take in iguanas. A male and a female iguana, they look, they move around each other, and a moment comes, and she lies flat on her belly, tips up her buttocks, and totally surrenders. He rushes up, puffs up, and totally dominates. If either one of them doesn't play their part perfectly, the copulation does not occur. She needs to be impressed that he's dominant. He needs to know that he can insert and that she's totally submissive. And my guess is, my hypothesis is, that all of S&M and all of B&D are elaborate forms of this basic, not even mammalian, not even avian, not even reptilian habit that is so central to copulation throughout all animals.
I have two things. I mean, I think it's a really interesting theory, and you know, one aspect of that is true. I mean, at some point across species, the woman has to eventually submit, right?
Absolutely.
And so we have that surrender. We have that in our DNA. And another aspect of it is that the man, by overtaking the woman, it's a display of his genetic fitness. Absolutely. You know, that he has the power to be able to do this, and that, in a sense, is also attractive. And that all makes sense, like from an evolutionary perspective. But what about the converse? And this is where I think some of the psychology comes in. You know, when the woman, as you can see in these images here, likes to dominate, the man likes to be submissive. And, you know, theories behind that have to do with, it's usually men who are very powerful in their everyday life who want to take that submissive role. There's something novel about that. And also with women, it's empowering. So, but where does that psychology fit in with that evolutionary explanation?
You know, who's to know? But I mean, the thing is, you know, there's the whole continuum from male to female, and there's all kinds of men who have very female characteristics and could have had much more estrogen in the womb, or they had some sort of childhood, you know. You as a psychologist, there's all kinds of psychological, you know, issues in childhood that may make you want to surrender. So, I mean, sex is complex, and on top of this basic, you know, reptilian dominance and surrender issue, you're going to have all kinds of variations.
And the same thing with women too. I mean, certain women like to be more dominant and not. But I also think that certain women who enjoy being submissive, it's not always abuse, like as we were kind of displaying.
They don't want to be abusive. They don't want to be surrender in the boardroom. It's only in bed. It's bedroom games.
Yeah, and women who. So, but in this film in particular, do you think that they romanticized abuse in a way?
I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, you know, I went to the movie and it was all 18-year-old girls. Now, I don't know what they're getting out of it, except for ideas for themselves in the bedroom. A walk on the wild side.
I think it was, you know, it depends on how you define abuse, and it depends on how you define romanticize, right? I do think that the reason it was such a runaway best-selling book and a high-grossing movie is that it did strike me as very romantic in a lot of ways. I mean,
it was romantic.
You mentioned the word cherish. In his own weird way, he's cherishing her, right?
He's falling in love with her.
He's falling in love with her. And
it's a Harlequin novel with B and D and S and M filtered in.
Let's add another movie to our conversation. In 1987, Fatal Attraction was the highest-grossing film worldwide. Starring Michael Douglas and Glenn Close, it tells the story of a sexual fling gone very, very bad.
And where's your wife?
Hey, honey! Oh, God,
And you're here with a strange girl, being a naughty boy.
I don't think having dinner with anybody's a crime.
I've got to see you.
This has got to stop.
No, it's not going to stop. It's going to go on and on.
She keeps calling me apart.
Hello?
Every time Beth answers the phone, she hangs up. I'm scared, Jimmy.
You play fair with me? Do you have an affair with her? I'll play fair with you.
I don't want to lose my family.
How could you do that?
So you're scared of me, aren't you? You're afraid. Gutless, heartless, spineless.
If you ever come near my family again, I'll kill you. You understand? Daddy! I'm not going to be ignored. Alicia, where's Ellen?
She's gone.
Call the police.
Whatever resentment she's feeling, she's probably got it out of her system.
What if she didn't get it out of her system? What then?
Fatal Attraction.
I guess you thought you'd get away with it. Well, you can't.
I have to say, I just reviewed this film, not having seen it since 1987, which it was on a first date with a boy named Scott. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it's very compelling. It's very psychological. It makes you think, and it's terrifying. So, I mean, we've been talking about sex and perception, and there's this point in the film where Michael Douglas's character says to Glenn Close, you know, come on, Alex, those aren't the rules. The rule, right? Now we're talking about rules, as if it's a sport, and he's playing one kind of sport and she's playing another. Are they? I mean, is there a science-based difference between her perception of a commitment and his sort of love-lust you know, going at it in that way.
Well, I think that, I mean, this is almost for the psychologist because, I mean, you know, she was totally addicted. I mean, this was a really powerful addiction. And of course, you know, around the world, people live for love, they kill for love, they pine for love, they die for love. And this movie really caught the very essence of love gone mad, you know.
It was an exaggeration, though, in the sense that this wasn't just a normal woman falling in love and going mad. I always use her as an example as a classic borderline personality disorder patient. Right. So
this could have happened with any man, right? Because isn't she already crazy? She's already, just add water?
Yeah,
I
mean,
semen?
You know, I wouldn't call her crazy, but I would say she definitely has a psychological disorder. And what's the symptoms?
Wait a minute, you don't call her crazy? Are you being a careful scientist?
I'm being
She's
very
a
careful.
loon.
I work with psychiatric patients, particularly borderline personality disorder patients. Actually did my PhD work on this disorder and what's the brain mechanisms involved, which I don't need to get into, but the typical symptoms of a borderline person is they go from intense loving to intense hating of the same person. They feel like even something someone might say that's not meant as anything, they'll take as a huge rejection. They have an unstable self-image. They're very impulsive. They tend to self-harm, you know, those people who are cutters. Just emotionally unstable, impulsive, sexually promiscuous. I mean, she fit all of the characteristics. So, of course, it's great in the beginning. When a borderline is in love and in love with you, it's great, and they're a bit manic even. But then when it switches and they feel this rejection, it's completely in the opposite direction, and this is a great portrayal of that. Yeah.
You know, the brain circuitry for love and hate are very closely connected. You can switch very rapidly from love to hate. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Then you're free. But add this, you know, really pathological person. But when you think of the amount of crimes of passion, not even people who are, you know, already mentally unstable, but regular people who would never kill anybody but end up killing their wife or their husband, or, I mean, the amount of crimes of passion are unbelievable around the world. I mean, there's a lot of powerful addictions, but when you give up alcohol, you don't start killing people. When you're rejected in love, people they start to stalk, they slip into clinical depression, they kill somebody else, they kill themselves. I mean, it's one of the most powerful brain systems that mankind's ever evolved.
You've said, I mean, it is, being in love is a drug. It's a
drug.
Absolutely. Your brain is not acting normally.
Now, whole parts for decision making shut down. These brain regions for positive illusions, the ability to overlook what you don't like, speed up. The sense of self, there's brain regions linked with self, and it becomes very porous. So that person almost becomes part of you. So you can't really see this difference and distinguish between them. Enormous changes in the brain. And the issue becomes, how come? I mean, why did this evolve, this brain circuitry for romantic love?
Well, it makes sense, evolutionary speaking, because it motivates you to, you know, bond and to pair with this person. You get rewarded, you know, neurochemicals when you're with them. And it encourages us to want to pair up and to have children and to stay together while we rear those children. So it makes sense that we've evolved these biological or neural mechanisms.
Right.
But, you know, when there's a mismatch in the environment, you know, things can go really wrong. And you don't necessarily even have to have a psychiatric diagnosis, but it can happen to anybody. You know, you just...
And it does.
Yeah.
I mean, they say that 1 out of 13 people is an alcoholic. Everybody's been addicted to love, if you play the game at all. You know, at some point, almost everybody's been hurt. I don't think almost anybody gets out of love alive. At some point.
You're careful not to call her crazy. I will call her crazy.
Okay.
And you can see it in the film as well. I'm looking at the image that we have up. The director and the designer put her in white so often, as if she's in a mental institution. Yeah. Rather than virginal or innocent white, she is like, and she's got the wild hair, right? Not just because it's 1988 or 87. And even her apartment, did you notice it was like, her apartment walls are exposed brick, but it's all painted white, and it's very Spartan. Yeah. You're always seeing her looking like a mental patient.
Yeah.
That great catch. I didn't know. That's a great catch. It's interesting.
Yeah, and unable to control her emotions. That's the other thing of it. You know, it's like this. We all have a bit of an emotional up and down, but we can modulate it to some respect. But you imagine the brake system in your brain is kind of turned off, and you just can't modulate these emotions. So everything she's experiencing is to the extreme, is to the nth degree. And also when you're rejected, and you're still in love, it's almost like you have to go through a withdrawal to get out of that, because you try even harder. right? It's like the same circuits still keep going, but the object of your affection is no longer, wanting you. And that can drive people crazy, so to speak.
As a matter of fact, my guess is that these people all share basically the same brain circuitry for feelings of romantic love. Just actually variation there too. But impulse control is a different system. And you can be madly in love with somebody and be able to control yourself to some extent. Or you can be madly in love with somebody and be totally out of control because there's no impulse control. So it's a whole lot of systems working together to make somebody, go off the wall.
So now we're going to dig further back to 1972 and Bernardo Bertolucci's film Last Tango in Paris, starring Marlon Brando and Maria Schneider.
In its review of Last Tango, the Village Voice reported vomiting by well-dressed wives. And for his work on Last Tango in Paris, Bernardo Bertolucci was convicted of obscenity by an Italian court and had his voting and other civil rights revoked for 5 years. 43 years later, 50 Shades of Grey is at least as graphic.
Absolutely.
Right? And no one's going to jail and no one's throwing up over it. So, Helen, what's going on in our society that we're open to this?
I think the biggest modern social trend is women piling into the job market in cultures around the world and reassuming the kinds of jobs that they had a million years ago as hunter-gatherer women. And as women gain economic power, they're gaining social power and sexual power and expressing their sexuality. And we're seeing this, tsunami change in male-female relations.
I fully agree. So I think that the women's lib, in a way, has allowed for the more kind of people are more accepting. It's like an empowerment of women. And I know it sounds strange, but strippers, even prostitutes who are, in a sense, feel sometimes empowered by the kind of sexual control that they're taking over these situations. And so I think the more liberated the society, women are in the society, the more people are more accepting of these kinds of films. And that's why they're still censored in certain places in the Middle East. The version that I saw was from, I think, China, where they're cutting out these scenes because it's still not acceptable.
Another 50 years, they'll be right where we are. I mean, we seem to be running leading the way in terms of, feminine expression of sexuality.
I just want to add this in, which is that The Last Tango in Paris, first of all, I hated it. I mean, I loathed that movie. I want those 129 minutes of my life back. It was indulgent and unsatisfying. It didn't. I thought Marlon Brando was off. I hated it, okay? But also the sex scenes, as opposed to 50 Shades of Grey, whatever your criticism of it, they were devoid of romance, but they were also devoid of connection. There was no chemistry between Brando's character and the girl.
Yeah.
He was in his early 50s, and she was 19 years old. I actually read about the casting, and they did not feel any chemistry towards each
that's
other.
Interesting.
And he told her, "You look just like my daughter," and she was the same age as one of his daughters. But to me, it was just bloated, not sexy, and the way that he was aggressive with her did not, even though she was there and kept showing up, it didn't have that patina of romance and the consensual aspect that 50 Shades of Grey did. So even now, I'm here 43 years later, I find it more likely to make me vomit too. I really, really didn't like this film.
In real life, I also read an interview with her, and she said that in retrospect, it felt like she was being raped throughout the film.
Well, the scene with the butter, the anal sex scene,
psychologically,
was not in the script.
Psychologically, yeah. Oh, really? And
it was not in the script. She was told minutes before.
But she kept on going back to it. She kept on going to that apartment. She gave him the butter. She didn't know what he was going to do with the butter, but she went through it. I mean, it was in that way. All three movies have this same sort of drive for sex and for romance and for connection, even though it's all pathological. I mean, I don't know how pathological it is in 50 Shades of Grey, but certainly it was pathological in Last Tango in Paris.
Of all of these movie characters, would you say they're all love addicts?
Yes. I think we are all love addicts, not just movie stars, all people. This is one of the most powerful.
If you're not a love addict, is there something wrong with you?
No, I don't think so. But I've studied romantic love for many, many years, and I've only run into 3 people who had really actually never fallen in love. until much later life. So they, and all three of them said that, and all three of them were married. They had a good marriage. They had a deep attachment. They had very good children. They made good careers, etc. But they had never felt that feeling of intense romantic love. And all three of them said basically the same thing to me when they finally fell in love. They basically said, Helen, I used to read Romeo and Juliet and go to these movies, but I just didn't get it. Now I get it. They finally felt the power of this brain system. It's a very powerful system.
Helen Fisher, we have loved having you here. Thank
You're
you
a
so
sweetheart.
much for coming by.
Thank you,
Yes,
thank you, thank you.
Next time on Science Goes to the Movies, we're looking at artificial intelligence via Ex Machina and Blade Runner with Christoph Koch, Chief Scientific Officer at the Allen Institute for Brain Science.
Don't forget to check us out on the web at CUNY.tv under the Science tab, where you'll find past shows, additional content, and a link to our app.